Step into the heart of Florida, where communities are coming together not just to defy state-imposed educational constraints, but to honor and elevate Black history. From the vibrant streets of Miami to the cultural hubs of Orlando, a groundswell of grassroots activism is reshaping the narrative of education. In the face of legislative hurdles and political maneuvers, Floridians are forging new paths to ensure that the rich tapestry of Black heritage is not just preserved, but celebrated. Join us as we explore how these diverse communities are turning adversity into opportunity, rewriting the script of education in the Sunshine State. This is a little bit of a nice twist on our last segment from this week. Helen, do you have anything good to say this time? I'm sorry, Cross. We'll start with you, actually. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah, so this story is about how, because Florida has a bunch of bans on teaching Black history and all sorts of, controversial issues like facts, that Florida churches are picking up the slack on teaching Black history, right? So when I first read this, all I could think of was, I am so tired. I am so exhausted. I'm so sick, and I don't know how, but I am still so surprised by Florida. Forgive me, Helen. Of course, you live there. I feel embarrassed, quite frankly. Prior to Obama being elected,
do you feel embarrassed for me? Do you feel embarrassed for me?
I feel embarrassed for our country, because prior to Obama being elected, I was so naive. I, like a lot of my friends, felt we were making good progress towards trying to become a post-racial society. And then Obama happened, and then the backlash that is MAGA and the Trump administration happened. And then we get things like DeSantis in Florida. And all this gave tacit permission to all of the Nazis who had been hiding as our neighbors around the country to start speaking their mind. And developments like this story are the end result. The Nazis, where they have a majority, have driven our friends and neighbors, whether they be Black or Asian or gay or trans or different in any way, they've driven them underground, right? This is like the old Underground Railroad that ran through churches. They've driven them out of the public square that is public schools and forced them to resort to community institutions like churches. So they're getting their basic education on their own history, not from their community, their tax dollars, their schools, but from their churches. We should be ashamed as a nation. This should not be a one-off story. This should be a national disgrace. And I do feel like it will be a disgrace. Generations hence, people will look back and think, how did they not learn from World War II? At least the citizens who supported Hitler were kept ignorant by the fact that there was no internet. They relied on a national press to feed them the images and the stories that the government wanted. But the MAGA crowd had access to every single piece of human knowledge right in their pockets on their phones. And they woke up and chose racism instead of facts. And I think that's what my grandchildren are going to think. They're going to look back at this time and not understand, because I don't even understand it now, and I'm living through it. Out of all the stories we've covered, this is the one that makes me the saddest in some respects. It means that, at least for now, the Nazis are winning. I don't know, Kelly, is there a way for us to beat the Nazis?
I hope it's not by taking it to the churches, to be honest with you. And
Yep.
I mean, that was the first thing that I thought of when I read this story was, this is a freaking problem. We are leaving what should be a secular education. We're pushing it out of the schools, like you said, and literally forcing it to be taught in religious settings from a religious point of view. And this is happening because these pseudo-religious Christian nationalists have been passing laws in Florida that are driving away any point of view but their own. And just like you said, it's like, it's almost like we were reading each other's notes for this episode, crossing. And I thought it was pretty interesting that both sides of this debate are both sides of the debate are sheltering under a religious umbrella, just like the first story we did this week. And with all my heart, I want to say good things about these churches. I am so happy that at least somebody stepped up to fill this gap. But at the very least, they're teaching something that the laws of Florida have the schools afraid to teach because of the wording. The wording of the laws, again, are overly broad. They're confusing. But I just have trepidations that a secular topic is being taught by a church. And can you imagine if this happened to other topics at school? Dad, I don't want to go to Sunday school. Get dressed, son. Otherwise, God won't be able to teach you how to find a common denominator.
So, I did find one particular thing about this particular article, like very touching. That the presenter Levon Bracey had gone to Africa and collected soil and brought it back to people that were attending her talk, and was giving members of the congregation that came to listen to her talk vials of soil from Africa, which I thought was beautiful. But it is a church, and hate to say it, and like I have problems with this, because as you were saying, Kelly, like this is just education. This is just giving people information about their history, their heritage, which should be taught in a secular organization, like a school. Weird. But I live in the state with Meatball Ron. I really love that nickname. I'm sorry. I really do. And he's just basically like, well, I like racism and being a bigot is really working for me, so I'm just going to lean in. And it just gets very frustrating because like this is such like reading this article, I had so many mixed feelings, because there's this wonderful story about an activist, that was passionate about, where her people came from, wanted to present that, give people that education, but it was still done in a church. And that's the thing that's so frustrating, because even as a white person, like I would love to like hear someone's experience. I love learning about something about people that are not me, are outside of myself. And that's how you break down, stop people from being bigoted, stop people from being assholes, is to hear other people's experiences, their journeys, and to connect with them as human beings. And because Ron is like pushing everybody, into the churches, those conversations are not happening as much, and it's not just, it's not just happening here. This is happening in pockets throughout the country of people being forced back into their churches to even get a basic education of their own culture. And I have a lot of mixed feelings. Like, great, okay, like this is a really beautiful story, but also kind of shitty. So it's Florida Success Week, everybody. This week of the nonprofits, everybody. Yay for me.
Why limit it to 1 week?
Yeah, I know. There's going to be more now? Florida suck stories, because that's what we do on this show. Anyway, go ahead, Eli.
I'm basically, we're all on the same page. It seems like I couldn't have said what I'm going to say better than any of you said it. But the idea of churches being involved in education was that was like my first sort of like, ooh, hold on. And then you start realizing, okay, no, like the state of Florida is actually making it really difficult for schools to do this appropriately and properly. And not just the state of Florida, but like, I like your nickname there, this meatball. Ron DeSantis is really making it difficult for people to do things the way that they ought to be done. I clicked on a couple of the other articles linked in this article, and it talked about how like he's already like he has already made it clear that he's not on board with teaching anything except basically white heteronormativity in Florida schools. He even went so far as to push new teaching standards. I think they said this was from 2022. New teaching standards that suggested that enslaved Africans benefited from the slave trade in the United States, and that is the thing that he suggested, or the teaching standards that he wanted implemented. And I just can't help but think, what an absolute piece of trash. And I going beyond that, I did start to think like, okay, we know how like faith-based charity works, right? Where people receiving this charity, receiving this service from the church, they are more often than not required to hear a religious message or be proselytized to in order to receive that service. And I would hate to know that that is also true for these Black history lessons. I did actually find the Faith in Florida toolkit that was linked in the article, and I went to look at it, and I didn't see anything. There was like, other than the name of the organization, Faith in Florida, there's no proselytizing. There's no scripture. There's no, I was really concerned that these messages they were going to teach were going to be more focused on the religious journey of these, particular individuals, these significant individuals in American history, more focused on their religious journey than their actual significant contributions to society and the world. And it just doesn't seem to be the case. So that, for me, I felt like a little bit of a silver lining. But I gotta agree with Cross Examiner. It just really, when you start to think like, oh, okay, now we have to like hide in the churches, so to speak, to learn not just it's not only Black history, it's American history as well, and that just doesn't sit right. That feels a little.
It feels kind of Jim Crowy.
Yeah,
it feels a little Jim Crowy.
Yeah. I agree. Being a student of history to some degree, I know that this pendulum will swing at some point in our country. It will inevitably swing to an enlightened country. It just takes time, but it's time that I may not see to live, or I don't know about my kids. Probably they'll see it. So while I do have hope, I'm just sad that I have to walk the earth when the Nazis feel comfortable in their racism and entitled in their bigotry, really, is what I'm. And I did have that side point that everybody else had. I didn't get to it first, but I do want to follow up where everybody was sort of like being taught in a church. I had the same exact reaction as everybody. I get it. I understand that churches are community centers in much of our country. While I don't really want to harp on that aspect, I do feel compelled to mention, things like you guys do. It worries me that if not in this particular case, Eli did the research to say what's being taught here. Then in the next case, right, that where we have to revert because our schools are not meeting our community's needs, because our politicians are not legislating for their entire constituency, only the people who agree with them. The people who are in the minority are left to go to their churches for these solutions because that's the only community that they have left. I worry that the history might be taught through a mystical lens. I worry that God might get mentioned and mixed up along with the facts so that kids can't distinguish between the God and the facts. And I worry that the church will potentially whitewash the role of Christianity in slavery, right?
Christwash.
Right. Christwash. Very good. Now, I'm a middle-aged white atheist cis male, so I get nervous opining on, hey, how should Black people learn their own history? But I will quote Chris Rock, who said, quote, "A Black Christian is a Black person with no fucking memory." And I think that that's one of the deepest things that he has said that can really do a lot to help that community or any other community that was sort of subjugated by Christianity. Why is Christianity so popular around the world? As the Catholics usually like to quote, it was done by the edge of a sword, just like slavery. So in the end, I want to say I'm sad. I want to say I'm glad that they're doing it. But yeah, it's going to take time to defeat the forces. Yeah, it is. I agree.
It's complicated. And that's the thing that's so frustrating about this.
Yeah, I agree.
That was what I feared the most, too, was history being taught through a mystical lens. I could see something like, God enlightened George Washington Carver to go to the peanut that the Lord had provided to him. Yeah, I could see something like that being taught, and that's bullshit. I mean, we're taking something that's historical and potentially turning it into religion, and that's definitely a problem, I think.
Yeah, I was turning around and looking for my textbook. I have one I was going to pull off my shelf from a Christian school. It was a science textbook for elementary kids. And the very first chapter is the moon. And the first sentence in this science book is God gave us the moon to blah, 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 blah. That's what I'm worried about.
Oh, boy.
Yes, right. Exactly. Right. Personally, I think we should pass a law to make every Floridian plant 2 trees a year to make up for all the oxygen that state is stealing from the rest of us.
as a resident Floridian, I do apologize for all the oxygen sucking that is happening.
I'm sorry, Helen. I guess I kind of understand. I'm getting old too, and I know you and Todd are, and you want to stay in the largest retirement home in the United States.
I don't want to stay here. I just can't afford to move out because there's too much fucking money everywhere.
You should think about moving away though, and joining us regular folks in the rational world.
Like, listen, if someone wants to give me all the atheist money to move out of Florida, I'll go. But there's something I do want to point out about. We did the last time I was on the show, we did an article on atheist churches, and that they're sprouting up throughout the country. And I would love, if we're we're gonna take it back to the churches. Okay, whatever. If we're gonna do these educational sort of talking points, can we do it in the secular part of churches that are propping up? Let's not do it in a Christian church. Let's do it with where there's someone that's actual historian that knows facts. Presentation. I would love that.
Do you think Floridians would have a problem with Black History Month being taught at the Satanic Church? I think they would.
They just don't like us. And there's issues going on with the TST right now. So that could be another conversation on the nonprofits. But it would be a problem because we're still considered less than, because we don't believe in the true God. Mm-hmm. We are atheists, and we're liberal, and and we're trying to brainwash everybody. That's the goal of this whole show, everybody, is to brainwash you into being free thinkers.
Yes.
The whole goal. So silly.
Really, the problem is that we have one extreme side of our political spectrum that's creating a government that's not serving the benefits of all of the country, or in this case, the state's citizens, strictly because of extreme political or religious or even historical reasons. Then when it's doing that, that government isn't serving the people. It's only serving some of the people. And I really find it entirely ironic that the very people who are pushing this kind of thing are also the same people screaming about upholding the Constitution.
Yeah.
Have you read the Constitution, though? That's why I'm always like, have you read that document? Have you? Because the way you're talking about it tells me you haven't read this.
I read it. I like most of it. I'm going to say that I do. I mean, we had problems with it. Some of it's outdated, but for the most part, I think it was a pretty good thing. I think it should be a little bit easier to change it, but other than that,
okay. I've been feeling real bad for Eli because we're very uppity people. I want to get more of Eli's thoughts because we're very talky.
Yeah, well, no, and I thought that my closing thought was just that there's no reason Florida residents shouldn't be allowed to learn Black history. And we've covered that earlier this week as well. My aversion to church-based education aside, I'm actually on board with this particular instance, and I think Cross was right to specify this time it seems like it's being done appropriately, at least based on the toolkit online. Who knows what's going on in the actual buildings? If it was just the churches volunteering their buildings to be used to conduct seminars or presentations, that's one thing entirely. Like I said, there's no reason Florida residents shouldn't be allowed to learn about Black history. And if Meatball DeSantis is going to do his level best to prevent that, then I'm glad someone is picking up the proverbial torch. And I'm glad to see religious institutions actually fighting a good fight for once. Cross, you seem to have something to say. Good.
It's always that.
I agree with you. I do agree. I did find my Science for Christian Schools textbook that I bought on eBay and it was written by the Bob Jones University, if you're familiar with them. Very first page is history of the moon, and it starts. God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. Genesis 1:16. That's the start of a Christian science class book. And it goes on to say, science can be defined as information gained using our senses. Faith means holding belief without seeing, hearing, tasting, blah, 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 blah. When the moon came into being, were there any people there to get the facts through their senses? And then it goes on to talk about science is faith. It's the classic young earth creationist bullshit that says you weren't there to see evolution. You weren't there to see the moon, how it was created, which is important to them because when you date the moon and how it's been receding from the earth, you come up with a universe or an earth that's 4 billion years, and they don't like that. So right off the bat, this quote unquote science book is teaching the religious kids that science is faith. They're sort of dragging science down to their level to say, oh, well, if it's all faith, then you should go with us. And that's my concern when you say the community has to turn to churches. Then even if it's in small ways, it could be history, and oh, by the way, don't let gays get married, or history, abortion should be illegal. Like all of these things that get sort of plugged into class, which a trained public school teacher knows to avoid, right? That's the other question is at the churches, what sort of training do they have on educating kids and handling disruptive kids and all that sort of stuff? So that's my rant.
Very well.
Kelly, final thoughts, opinions?
I think I pretty much said everything I have to say. I really think we got to be careful about. I think it's really great somebody's stepping up to teach this. I just think we have to be careful about who we're letting teach it, and we'll make sure that they're teaching it in the correct way and not with religious overtones. That's about.
But we live in a country where they're allowed to do this, and that's the opposite of what the conservatives want, right? They want this to be the rule, and nobody else can do it. Where we're like, well, I hope they're not, but they're allowed to because it's their life.
Yeah. So if you don't want to fall for BS and become more educated and also find out about topics that might change your mind on a few things, do some clicking here or here. It's over there or down there. Do some clicking, y'all. Watch more videos. We love attention, so do it. Okay? Do the thing.